Really nice clean. Okay, let's get out of the 90s. That's it for my 90s Peavey gear. Let's move on to the 2000s. And the 2000s is not necessarily known as Peavey's best years. Let's just call it what it is. I tend to disagree with that a little bit because I think that the guitars from this era are just so good. They're very high quality, and I don't have a Peavey Wolfgang to kind of compare this against, but this is really in that lineage. This is a Peavey ST Ltd or Peavey ST Limited. Not exactly sure how to kind of pronounce it, but it is ST Ltd as far as the model name. Letter model names are always a pain in the ass for me for just like searching issues or trying to find information on this. Like, for instance, this guitar is not even listed in Peavey's manual directory, and I kind of have a feeling it has to do with the fact that it's just named letters. ST-LTD could have gotten lost in the shuffle. But this guitar is born out of the Eddie Van Halen legacy. This is not an EVH guitar by any means. There's no association with Eddie, but the headstock, the scale length, the body, and the humbucker HSS setup is definitely kind of built out of that Wolfgang legacy that they built with Eddie Van Halen. Peavey and Eddie's association ended in the mid-2000s, and from that point they're not allowed to use his name on any more gear, so they kind of pivot away from the Wolfgang branding and come up with their own names for gear that they already own the intellectual property for. So they're not really breaking the mold with this guitar because they already did with the Wolfgang, but this takes a lot of the lessons they learned from the Wolfgang and just kind of makes it a little more modern and or accessible for the everyday player. We lose the sculpted top, which the Wolfgang was known for, so this is kind of just a flat top, and it looks like it has binding around the body, but it's not. It's very PRS in design in that regard, in that this is actually the bare wood of the maple top that has been exposed or tape seamed off and not painted or scraped off. I don't know exactly how they did it, but it's actually a faux binding that's the bare maple. Looks really classy. I love it. So I couldn't find what the actual tone wood of this guitar is, but I'll bet it's basswood because the Wolfgang is a basswood guitar, and Eddie was really famous for saying, I don't care what it's made of. That doesn't affect the sound. What matters is the pickups and the hands. So that's really the legacy of the Eddie Van Halen guitars, is that we get away from really expensive high-end tone woods. We use more readily accessible ones like basswood, and then put a maple top on it. This is what's considered a quadruple A flame top, and the paint job is pretty dark, so you can't really see the flames. I wish it was a little lighter or a little more translucent to see the actual maple flame in this top, because it is very nice. But beyond that, just two knobs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-way switch, so it's kind of Strat-like in its switch layout, since we do have 3 pickups, HSS. We do have a rosewood fretboard with acrylic dot inlays. We have a maple neck, but we've done away with the bilaminate maple neck. So this is a single piece of maple, no scarf joint, no funny business, just a single kind of Fender-esque neck. And the headstock, I mentioned it very briefly, it's very similar to the Wolfgang, whereas Eddie had a little cutout up here, but he did have the 3 tuners per side, and it looks very similar. That gives a straight string pull. It's a really nice, economical design. These pickups are called the VTS and VTH pickup, H for humbucker, S for single coil. I don't know where they get that VT name, but those 2 letters show up quite a bit in Peavey history. So VTH and VTS pickups in this. I like the zebra style look of the humbucker, the black and white. It's pretty legit. One interesting thing is the stock Grover tuners that you'll find on this guitar. I have never seen a Peavey guitar come stock with Grover tuners. They usually have Peavey's own proprietary tuners, and I gotta say, I love Grover tuners, so great on you, Peavey. Thank you. We do have a tremolo on this system. It's very compact, but it is a Peavey / Hipshot dual branded tremolo. I don't know what Hipshot was as a company back in 2001, but I have a feeling they were kind of small and relying on groups like Peavey or smaller manufacturers that would pick up their equipment and spec it on their factory guitars. So this is a Peavey/Hipshot tremolo system. It's called the Ultra Glide Tremolo. We're back to our Fender 25.5-inch scale length, so that's very Eddie Van Halen. We have jumbo frets on this guitar. The first Peavey I've seen with jumbo frets, very modern appointment. A Graflon, again, black nut here. And everything about this guitar is sexy, it's light, it's fast. The neck is slightly chunky, but not like too fat like a baseball bat, or certainly not Ibanez skinny. So it's kind of right in the middle, very comfortable. And of course, rosewood is a pretty classy choice for this guitar. Let's go ahead and hear this guitar in the 5150 in that lead channel. Of course, we have two single coils as well. They sound as you would expect. If you'd like to hear more about this guitar, any of these guitars, then I do have individual videos that I've created on them in the past. I'll link them down below. Okay, let's go back to the bass world. Next, we have an International Series bass. And International Series means that it was made overseas in China, most likely. And in 2004, and this is one of the reasons why people have an issue with certain Peavey stuff, is that in 2004, Peavey opened up overseas manufacturing. They didn't cease manufacturing in the US entirely, but they started making certain things overseas in China, putting a lower price point on them and hoping that that lower end of the market kind of filled up their coffers. And I don't think it necessarily did, because it seems like once the 2000s hit, we seem to have more of an emphasis on higher end musical gear, and the lower end stuff tends to get lost in the shuffle. But this is basically a P-bass knockoff. You can tell that the body shape is slightly different than a regular Fender P-bass. It's not nearly as rounded off. It's a little more blocky and angular, and I think we get a little more on this horn here. So it's not a one-to-one P-bass by any means, but the pickup configuration is definitely meant to emulate a Fender P-bass. We have two knobs, volume, tone, and it's pretty basic. We have a 34-inch scale length on the Milestone 2 bass, so full scale length as far as the bass is concerned, and a maple neck. And this maple neck is not bi-laminate as well. It is one single piece of maple with a rosewood, maybe Pau Ferro. I think it's probably a rosewood fretboard, but it could be some other type of wood in the mid-2000s. It looks like rosewood. I would imagine the body is probably basswood or basswood, however you pronounce that. And again, it's hard to find a lot of information on this specific instrument. So hopefully if you have questions beyond that, you can do a little research. But let's go ahead and hear what the Milestone 2 International Series bass sounds like. This is a passive bass, by the way. There's no active preamp in here with a 9 or 18 volt circuit, so It's just standard passive P bass pickup. Pretty punchy. It still has that P bass thump, but it just doesn't have the same richness or beauty of the P bass. It's just a little more kind of pedestrian, we'll say, but it's very, very passable. And I've actually recorded with this bass quite a bit because it is so passive of a bass. It doesn't want to stick out too much or be in your face. It's just in the background, kind of grooving, and it's just a high quality bass for the price point. You could probably pick this bass up for about 200 bucks today. But the reputation of Peavey is starting to go down by this point, and seeing made in China on their products probably turned quite a few people off in that mid 2000s to 2010s era. Okay folks, just two more that I want to talk about of Peavey equipment that has kind of defined my relationship with the brand. So I mentioned the Peavey 6505 and the 6505 Plus line of amplifiers. Well, similarly to their relationship with Eddie Van Halen on the guitars, their relationship with the amp 5150 ended as well. So they still own the intellectual property of the 5150 amp, but they couldn't use the branding, the name of it, because Eddie owned that, and they obviously couldn't use Eddie's name at all, so they changed it all up. They went, instead of 5150, we're going to go with the 6505 branding. And this is right around 2005. So what that means is they took the very first year of Peavey, 1965, and the current year, 2005, and smashed them together to come up with their four-number equivalent of 5150. So whenever you see 6505, that's essentially a Peavey 5150 amp after the Eddie Van Halen relationship ended. Peavey kept the 120 watt head in the line, and I believe it's still there today, even with a couple more variants beyond what they had back in the day, including like a British voice version with EL84 tubes. And currently the tube complement in the 6505 or Plus version is the 6L6 tube. I think they might actually be the 6L6 GC version. Take that for whatever it means. It's essentially the same exact circuit, and you'll see debate online about this particular topic pretty hot and heavy, whether the 6505 is exactly the same circuit as a 5150. And I can't say for certain, but I've played through a 6505 and a 6505 Plus, and they sound incredible. So ultimately, does it matter? No, they still sound effing great. But the particular amp that I'm familiar with that I used to own is the 6505 Plus Combo 112 version of this amplifier. So they took the 120 watt version, cut it down to 60 watt, and made a single 12-inch speaker combo out of it. And you might think, wow, a single 12 with the 5150, isn't that a bit outmatched? Yes, typically, but the speaker they chose was a Sheffield speaker initially, which I think they moved on to a Celestion speaker after that, like a V30 or something with a higher wattage rating. But having a single 60 watt speaker in that amplifier does great. It makes a ton of noise, and you still have the auxiliary out to plug in a cabinet externally. So our tube complement for the 6505 Plus are the two 6L6 GCs plus 5 12AX7s for the preamp, that is. So 6L6s, 12AX7s, very, very common tube complement, and a tube complement that's been copied over and over and over again because of this amp. Just like on the 5150, we do have a dedicated effects loop that you can plug in rack effects or any effects for that matter. It doesn't have to be rack, but there is an effects loop on the back of this thing. The combo came with a built-in reverb tank. I think that's just because they could. They could just put it there, doesn't take up a lot of space, and it gives you another tonal variety that you can add into the mix. So that's the 6505 Plus combo amp. It's just a really badass amplifier that can get down to bedroom volumes almost, I'd say. It's not the best bedroom amp, but I played it pretty quiet for quite a while, as well as cranking it up and playing it through this 4x12 cab or 2x12 cab. It doesn't matter. It's very versatile in that regard, and it's just a great sounding amp. The one knock on the 6505 Plus combo that I would give, again, is that it's made in China. Some people think that that makes a world of difference. I tend to not put too much of an emphasis on it, but it does enter my mind where a product is made, and that kind of influences things slightly. But I'm not going to tell you that products made in China are crap, because they are not. They're actually very, very high quality these days, especially amplifiers and guitars. And sticking your nose up at Chinese-made stuff is probably going to cause you to miss out on some pretty cool stuff. So the very last thing that I want to talk about with regards to 2000s Peavey gear is the Peavey PVM328 microphone. This is a drum-specific microphone. It's meant for toms in that it comes with a clip that you can mount onto the rim of any drum, and it comes with actually its own dedicated XLR 90-degree cable that can hopefully get it out of the way of your drum set and make it as low profile as possible. The PVM328 is part of a larger set of microphones, which I don't have any of the other ones, but there's some PV32 blank variations that are meant for snare, for bass, for other toms, but this is just a single tom mic that I picked up, and I actually find it very, very good for a 16 or 18-inch floor tom. It's a neodymium dynamic microphone, so you don't need any external phantom power, and the neodymium magnets are pretty high-end. They're very light and powerful. This particular microphone has a super cardioid pattern, which is potentially going to pick up some external noise from the room, but it's actually pretty good at isolating the sound of a tom and cutting out the other sounds. Not quite as good as an SM57 for that purpose, but it makes up for it in kind of having a lot more body and fullness that you can add to the sound. This particular microphone can hear down to 20 hertz and as high as 12,500 hertz. So it's really good on the low end stuff. You don't hear too many sounds on the drum kit below 20 hertz. We have a sensitivity of -53 decibels, so there's a spec that I don't know too much about, but our max SPL is 134 decibels, which is loud as hell. If you're playing at 134 decibels, then you're probably going to tear your drum set to pieces, because that's really, really loud. 110 decibels is about as loud as I can get on my drum set, maybe 112, but beyond that, you're in danger zone territory. So hopefully you shouldn't be ruining this mic by sending a whole bunch of sound through it. Again, it's just a regular XLR interface, so it comes with its own 90-degree cable, and like I mentioned, that tom mount. pick up the rest of these mics from this set at some point and swap out all of the SM57s that I have on my drum set now and see if they'll actually improve the sound, or who knows, maybe it won't change a thing. But it's one of those things that I have planned for the future, so stay tuned for that. So that is my history with Peavey throughout the decades. I've had equipment from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the one common refrain is that, damn, this stuff is good. It really sounds good with a lot of different applications, a lot of different speakers if you're using amplifiers, different cabinets for amplifiers. The guitars are versatile unto their own right, and they just sound good. I really like picking up Peavey instruments and playing them. And I know a lot of you might have a negative opinion, or they might have a negative reputation out there based on whatever history you've kind of picked up throughout the years. But I can tell you from my personal history, it's more good than bad. And if you do pick up a dog, it's probably an outlier. And the next one you get, if it does say Peavey on the headstock, it'll probably be a good one. So let me know what you think of all this amazing Peavey gear. If you want to hear anything more in depth, please let me know and I can do a more dedicated tonal sample, or you can check out the videos linked below. So please like and subscribe if you like this content. That always helps out. I'm Tanner Knight, and I hope to see you on the next one.